Now we're going to talk about how to return values from functions in Python. Last time we learned about functions, which is a way to define reusable pieces of code. And we also learned how we can do parameters with these functions to pass in data. But now we're going to learn about returning data from functions, meaning that whenever you invoke the function, it can return data back to where it was called. Let's do a basic example here. So if we do define get greeting, we can pass in the name. And then last time we did this, we did print what's up and then the name. What's up name based on the name that you pass in. So if we call this function, we can do get greeting. Let's pass in Billy. So now if you run it, we get what's up Billy. So with returning, we can make it so that instead of just printing it in the function, we can have the function return the data, and then you can do whatever you want with that data outside the function. So for example, let's copy this formatted string here, Control X. Let's instead do return and then paste it. So now we're returning the string here, the formatted string from the function. So when we call get greeting, we get that returned back to us. So if we run the code now, nothing happens. As you can see, there's no output because this function now gives it back. So we need to store it. So we'll say greeting is equal to get greeting. So now if I do print greeting, we are taking the value returned by the function invocation when you call the function and storing it to the variable, and then we're printing the variable. Let's run it. There we go, we get what's up Billy. So again, the difference here is that instead of the function having the responsibility of printing the data, instead we made it so that the function's returning the data back or giving it back where it's called. And we're simply doing that with the return keyword here. Return, and then the value or the data that you want to return. I think another good example of this is a function that we made last time. We made an add function. We passed in num1 and num2. We did the sum is equal to num1 plus num2. And then before we just printed out the sum, right? That's not very usable for complex programs. In more complex programs, you may want to calculate the sum, right? But you don't want to just print it out. You may want to actually do something with the value, the actual sum itself. So instead of just printing it out, let's return it. So we can do return sum. So now when we call add, let's say print, we can do add 1 and 2. So if we run this, we get 3. This makes our programs even more dynamic because, like I said, just to reiterate, now that we have it returning the value, we can do whatever we want with that value. So we can say sum1 is equal to this, 45 and 23. And then we could do, for example, let's say sum2 minus sum1, and then we'll print that out. And there you go, we get 65. So this is just to illustrate that because the function now returns the data, we can store it however we want to, do whatever we want with the data, and we're good to go. You can also just directly cut this and put it here, and then put this one here, like that. Here's another function called multiply. It takes in two parameters, multiplies them together, and returns the result of that operation. So if we have a function like this, we know it should be returning a number, the result of this multiplication operation here. So this means that we can use it directly in numerical, operations. So for example, we could do total is equal to multiply, say 5 and 3, and then we could just do directly onto that 10. So before, this would be some number potentially, right? So we know that this should return a number because we're passing in two numbers that are going to be multiplied, and then we're returning the number back. So we can think of this as a number itself. So whatever the number is returned by this, plus 10, is going to be stored in total. And then we could print out total or do whatever we want with it. Another example is this. If we have a get name function, it returns just the string Alice. Let's just use it directly in the format string here. So hello, and then Alice, because we know this returns Alice, so you can think of it as actually having Alice, and then it's going to be part of the string and print it out. So if we run it, there we go, we get hello Alice. Let's do another one. So if we have a function called isEven, we pass in a number, we check to see if the number is even by using modulus. So modulus, remember, is the remainder. So what is the remainder of number divided by 2? If it's equal to 0, then it's true. So return true, otherwise false, it's not even. So since this should return a boolean, since we're doing this comparison operation here, we can then use it in situations where you would use a boolean normally or a condition. So we can do if isEven pass in 4. If that's true, it'll print this. If it's false, it'll print this. If you're from a different programming language, like Java, for example, you know that the return type has to be explicitly defined. But in this case, with Python, you don't have to do that. So it could technically be something other than a boolean that is returned from this function. But since we are using it in a context where it should return a boolean with the double equal sign here, we should be able to use it in a context where a boolean is usually provided. That's the thing with Python. There's not strict rules in this case. You just kind of have to look based on context. But I'll show you guys in a future episode that you can actually provide explicit types to the parameters in the return type if you want to make it more structured. So stay tuned for that. Here's a good example. So what if we want a function that can give you a grade? We had something similar to this when we learned about if statements. We learned that based on a score, we can figure out if it's an A, B, C, or D, or an F. Let's actually make a function that can do the same thing. So we're going to define get grade. We're going to pass in a score, and then based on the score, we're going to return the letter score. So I'll paste it so you don't have to see me type it all out. So if it's greater than or equal to 90, return A, 80, return B, 70, C, 60, D, and then otherwise return F. So now if we want to use the function, here's some examples of using it on different scores. So 95, 85, 75, and 55. Let's run it. And we get A, B, C, and F. Nice. This is another great example of why returning values is helpful, because before, without returning, we can only print stuff out basically, or just do something with the value. We couldn't actually give it back. So that didn't give us a lot of capability in terms of making the function actually useful. In this case, we can call it get grade, get the score back, which is A, B, C, D, or F, and then actually do something with that score. In this case, we're just printing it out, but we can have it part of an if statement, for example. So if it's an F, we can say you need to get better or something like that. We can give advice based on the actual score that was given. So that is it for this episode. It was a shorter one, but you learned something very important, which is how to return values from functions in Python. So now you can unlock even more capability with your programs. Hopefully you guys found this video interesting. I'll see you guys next time, and peace.